Hi, everyone. So I'm super excited to be here today for your last session of the day. Thank you for spending some time with me. And what I'd love to talk with you about today is how you can get accepted into a top MBA program. So many folks ask us here at Stratus for help as they target the M7 specifically MBA programs. So if you're not already familiar with who the M7 are, go ahead and take a look at all the ones listed here. The benefit of you attending this session here is that you'll be able to accurately identify your own personal strengths and weaknesses, and most importantly, take away some action items that you can use to strengthen your profile. So as we get started, just want to say maybe you'll want to take out a notepad and be prepared to take some notes. I'm going to give the overview of the areas that we've seen the admissions committees evaluate, but I'm also going to demonstrate these in action by sharing some specific stories and case studies of folks that I've worked with in order to give you a more tangible view and understanding of what the playing field actually looks like. So many of the stories that I'm going to share might spur some thoughts for you, or ideas or questions or actions you could take. So yeah, I'm going to do a brief introduction so you have a little background on me as well as Stratus, and then we will get right down into the areas of evaluation. So, hello, my name is Sophie Hilaire, and prior to being an admissions counselor at Stratus, I spent some time in the Army. From there, I went straight to Wharton for the full-time 2-year MBA. I spent both years there actually supporting the admissions office and evaluating applicants, and then I spent my second year there as part of the career management office, helping first years prepare for consulting interviews. Because from business school, I went to McKinsey for 5 years as a consultant. And while I was there, I also supported McKinsey's recruiting team in evaluating candidates. And at the same time, I was supporting candidates on the other side in helping them get ready for their interviews. So I've seen a lot of sides of, the whole application process in many different ways. And I would have to say my favorite part of it is always helping people figure out what their story is and drawing out everyone's most unique and memorable qualities. So, to share a little bit about Stratus, all of our counselors have an MBA from a top business school. Many have worked on an admissions committee themselves, whether it was part time like me or full time, sometimes for many years. We've created a team based approach which mirrors exactly what admissions committees have. So, if you work with us on in a comprehensive way, you will have a primary counselor, a senior strategist, a school specific reviewer for each application you send in, and professional proofreaders. So many people ask us to help give them profile reviews and even ratings when they reach out. I would say there's no perfect profile, but we do a lot of work to help tell our client stories in a very unique and memorable way. So the idea here is to create and communicate a compelling narrative about why you need an MBA and being specific about your post MBA goals and how you're going to get there. So we care a lot about the outcome. We want you to get in a great program that is a great fit for you. So here, I want to just share a bit about kind of the areas for evaluation that I mentioned earlier. By the way, I see some people have been throwing some questions and comments in there. At the end, I'm going to reserve some time for Q&A, and I will cover all the questions at once then. So if anything pops into your mind while I'm going through this presentation, feel free to just throw something in the comments, and I'll do my best to get to all of them at the end. But yes, back to this slide. So these are the different areas for evaluation. Think about these as 5 areas. Think of these 5 areas as you assess your own personal profile. So the first one is academics and readiness for an MBA program. This is going to be comprised of your GPA from undergrad or any other degrees that you got after that, and your GMAT, GRE executive assessment. The second one is work experience. And number 3 is leadership and community involvement. 4th is recommendations. Some schools want 1, some schools want 2. And the 5th is definitely your essays. So every admissions committee is going to evaluate applications a little differently, but most will look, at the same areas, and they're going to do so in a holistic way. Keep in mind that in any given year, there are a ton more qualified applicants than there are seats in any given program. So after applications are evaluated, the admissions committee is going to select the class to create as diverse as possible of a cohort. Um, so imagine that for each of these areas of evaluation, all candidates are being graded on some sort of scale. You can think of the best ratings being an A or a 1, while the worst would be an F or a 5. There are very few candidates who would get straight A's down the board. But if you have more C's and D's than you have A's and B's, you're probably unlikely to be invited to interview. Though I have seen and worked with people who have, a fatal flaw of a low GPA or a low GMAT or, haven't been as active in extracurriculars, but they supplement it with really high marks in the rest of them and then pull it all together in a really great story. So that's kind of, like I said, don't be disappointed if you don't have A's and B's across the board. Academics and quantitative readiness for that one, these are just the pure numbers that drive rankings. They're their GPA and GMAT or whatever other standardized test you're taking. So you're going to want to be in or above the 80% range to be a competitive candidate. And if your GPA falls below the 80% range for that school, you can make up for it with a really strong GMAT. In that instance, you're not going to be one of those folks who, can get away with like a low GPA and a low GMAT. Admissions committees are going to look where you attended undergrad as well as your course of study. So in the end, they want to admit students who are prepared to take on the quantitative rigor of their program, but a 770 GMAT on its own is never enough to be admitted. So just keep that in mind. For work experience, the average years of work experience for top MBA programs is 4 to 5 years, but 80% of the students have somewhere between 3 and 8 years work experience. So the number of years is important, but so is what you have accomplished in that time. Have you managed people, managed projects, managed budgets? How much? Did you work on a cross-functional team? Do you have global experience? Can you quantify your impact? And definitely do that throughout your resume if you can. And next, the leadership and community involvement. Some candidates may have outstanding grades, test scores, work experience. This is much easier if all you have done is study and work, but admissions committees look for leadership and community involvement as an indicator of your ability to balance schoolwork with other activities. There's a lot of learning in an MBA program that happens outside the classroom, actually. So if you haven't been involved in the past, it's unlikely that you're going to suddenly be interested in leading clubs and activities in an MBA program. So you want to show them that you've had a history of doing this even while you were working full time. For recommendations, most MBA programs are going to be looking for 2 recommendations and expect one of these to be from your current immediate supervisor. If you can't ask them, maybe they don't know you're applying to business school, you can just explain why in an optional essay. So don't worry. But beyond that individual, who's going to go to bat for you and call you out as the best in your peer group, or better yet, the best one they have ever worked with in their 3-decade career? That's the person that you want to reach out to for essay or recommender number 2. And then finally, for the essays, the areas we've already discussed can't really change much between now and submitting applications in round 1. You've already, either got your undergrad, you definitely have your undergrad GPA. Maybe you're already done with your standardized tests. You already, have done the work experience and who you've worked for the recommendations. However, for the essays, I believe there is no reason that every single one of you can't get an A on your essays still. It's still completely within your control, especially, even if you're applying for round 1, plenty of time. I just kicked off with someone in the last few days for round 1. And I wait much longer and you may have some challenges, but right now I think you can all still get an A on your essays. Many merit scholarships are driven by the quality of the story that you tell through your essays. And so we're going to dive very deep on this one. Imagine, if you will, that your essays are 3 times more important than your GMAT score. Honestly, that is the thing that may make or break for a candidate. So MBA programs want to know that you can handle the academic rigor of business school, and they look for academic prowess in different ways. So we talked about the GMAT and the GRE for standardized tests. Are you within the 80% range for the schools that you're applying to? Those numbers get updated every year, so take a look. The second is quantitative preparedness. So that would be the quant part of your test, any transcripts from undergrad, any postgraduate education, and yeah, you could even do. There are other ways to show that your academic prowess if you're not a strong test taker or your GPA wasn't great for one reason or another. Quantitative skills are really the thing that you want to showcase for an MBA, and there are courses that actually offer transcripts so you can show that in an academic setting you would have gotten hopefully an A. Kind of like the essays are within your control. If you take a course, online, there's something called Math for Management that's offered by UC Berkeley that we often recommend to clients, and UCLA also has a program that you can do online. So those are viewed as very reputable in the eyes of admissions committees because they very closely mirror what you would do in school. So, and then finally, what about global exposure? Did you do any study abroads? All of this will show, how you would behave in an academic setting. So now I want to share my first case study with you guys. So CD here, who I worked with, had not a great GPA. For most schools, it's going to be, at least a 3.5. His was 3.2, and his major was East Asian Studies. So he had a lot of very interesting material that he performed well in, but what brought his GPA down was actually his quant-based courses, his math, his econ, and his statistics. So obviously that's not good if you want to attend an M7 school. But for him, he only wanted M7. It was M7 or bust. Didn't even want to entertain anything else. He said he would just stay working if he didn't get in. But then another thing happened. His GMAT also wasn't. It wasn't really bad, but it was definitely below the 80% range. So I encouraged him to retake the GMAT. So he did that 2 more times. Each time he fared better than the previous time, and then he finally, on the final attempt, snuck into the 80% range. But it was still below the median. So because of that, I thought, okay, let's not give the admissions committees anything to worry about. I suggested he spend some time taking a course, which he did, the Math for Management at UC Berkeley, I just mentioned, and he did very well and got an A. So that transcript was evidence that he's equipped and capable on the academic side, but the overall effort of multiple GMATs and another course, some folks ask me like, oh, is that bad if they see I've taken the GMAT, 4 times? Actually, that is something that shows the admissions committee that you are committed, that you are persistent, and also that you are self-aware of your shortcomings and you're going to keep on working at them. So I say take it as many times as you need until you get the score that you want. And he was accepted at Kellogg. So for professional experience, I mentioned earlier, the average number of years is 4 to 5, but the range is more like 3 to 8. Within this, admissions committees are going to see like what skills did you develop, what industry were you in, what functional knowledge have you learned, how did your career progression look? For every field, it's going to be different. They know that, but did you have any early promotions ahead of your peers? When you were managing people, did you have management experience? Did you manage folks? Any projects or budgets? What was the impact of your contribution, quantitative and qualitative? Is your progression logical? By that I mean, have you stayed at the same company and kind of climbed the ladder there, or have you kind of taken a more, approach of like hopping around to different jobs? How have your promotions looked, the contributions that you've made, and yeah, so that's mainly the points I'd mentioned for professional experience. Also, global exposure can be a great thing to mention here for a lot of schools. DEI very recently became a very important part of your application. So it was like not a part of the application, and then suddenly one year it was like essay questions sometimes, and also brought up in interviews. So if you have global exposure that that has been a part of your professional experience, whether you've gone to other countries to work or just worked on very diverse teams, that's something that you can mention in your application as well. Also, with the professional experience, this is when you could have your recommenders actually help tell your story for you so that it's not all just coming from you and other folks are corroborating your key themes and other things that you want to bring through in your application. That's something that we work with on our clients with a lot. And one thing in your story that is going to be telling the admissions committee why now for an MBA. And so you'll have to paint a clear picture for why your professional experience that you came from has brought you to this very pivotal moment that is going to help you achieve bigger and better things in the future that they are going to want to put their brand on. So Ross here came to us only 2 years out of undergrad. So he would have had 3 years when he matriculated, which is less than the 4 to 5 year average of work experience. But it is within that 3 to 8 year range. So it's definitely not a deal breaker, but he needed the other parts of application to really shine in order to make up for his lower than average time in the workforce. Imagine you're in a classroom with people who have way more work experience than you, and it just wouldn't be as rich of a discussion. So he did have a high GMAT and a solid GPA from a top tier school. So that certainly was helpful. And because all applicants need to answer this, why MBA, why now, and why at HBS, why Stanford, etc. But he had only been out of school for 2 years. So the why now aspect was very critical for him. He told a compelling story about his promotions at this consulting firm and all that he had learned in that very short period of time. So he was ready to go to the next step to prepare to enter his family business. And with those details, he successfully answered the why now question. So as you're considering applying to MBA programs, think about if you can make a strong case that now is the time. And if it is, go for it. And if not, maybe consider waiting another year when you can connect those dots a little more clearly. So schools are in the business of creating future leaders. And why would you think that leadership would matter in the application? So they want to bring in people who have started to lead already, have some exposure and understanding of what it takes, as well as awareness of their personal leadership style. So consider how you've led in different ways, whether it's managing people at work, clubs, or organizations in college, training new hires, in the community, mentoring, coaching. While you're at business school, you're going to need to juggle a lot of things with classes. There's going to be clubs, recruiting, other programs, events, competitions, a lot of social time that maybe you haven't had time for while you've been busy working. So business schools are really looking for people that are multidimensional. And think about what you've done to either develop new skills or connect with your passion, take initiative, demonstrate commitment. This is actually a really big opportunity for applicants to move the needle in their application and stand out from the other ones. So PH here was really fun to work with. He had a solid GPA from a public university. He had a 710 GMAT and was not coming from an underrepresented demographic. He had worked 5 years in the military, but not in a role that M7 programs typically seek out. So he came to us at a crossroads. Should he apply to MBA programs with just the military experience that was kind of average, or should he accept an offer at Teach for America to round out the leadership community part of his application and delay for, a year or two? So we advised him to actually spend a couple years at Teach for America in order to have a leg up on his veteran peers and really double down on the community aspect while he was there. So he started a robotics club actually while he was at his TFA role, and that totally took off and won the school numerous awards. And he quickly became one of the school's most beloved teachers in a very short period of time. I mean, it was really awesome to see, given that this was not at all his, initial thought of where he thought his life would go. So between his military service and then adding on top of that Teach for America and all the community building that he now had in his application, it was in much better shape for a shot at an M7 school, and he was accepted at Wharton. This client, Rachel, had a very high GPA at an Ivy League school and a solid GMAT. She worked in strategy at a large bank holding company, and her challenge was on how she could differentiate herself. We figured out that the answer was to draw on her extracurriculars and leadership experiences. So she was very interested in fashion and volunteered at a fashion incubator, giving entrepreneurs in fashion the opportunity to draw on more resources to help them build their businesses. And Rachel and I spent a lot of time digging into her story, what motivated her. Her long-term goal was to run her own incubator, and she needed leadership and entrepreneurship skills that an MBA would offer. So from this, I would say to anyone, you really have to nail your story. A lot of people have killer stats, but you can stand out if you tell a very compelling story. The application process is a human process. So people need to get you. They need to feel like they connect with you, with the essence of you when they pick up your entire application and go through it, especially the essays. So a clear story is what's going to make that happen. So recommendations. These are incredibly important. I have personally heard through the grapevine that if HBS had to pick between having either your essay or your recommendations to evaluate your candidacy, that they would actually pick the recommendations. So don't overlook how important these are, and also the importance of making sure your recommenders are prepared to share the key themes that you would want them to in your application, and that you're picking people who are going to be, your biggest, best champions in your professional career. So first you have to figure out who's going to write it. Who are those champions, and are they supportive of your MBA aspirations? Ideally, one of them is going to be your immediate supervisor or a former supervisor, someone that has a really strong sense of the actual work you did on a day-to-day basis. And I tell people this all the time, titles do not matter. In fact, if you get someone with a big fancy title to write a recommendation and they obviously don't know the details of your daily work, but instead just keep everything at like a very high level of platitudes, that's actually going to hurt your application. So it's okay to not use your current supervisor, like I mentioned earlier, but you're going to want to write an additional essay to address why you didn't if you decide not to. And just to underscore that one point about the fancy titles, because I know a lot of people think, oh, I have a connection with the, president of this company, even though I just saw them in a meeting once. For me, the version of that was when I was in the Army and I was working for a 3-star general, and a lot of people across the base would reach out to him and say, hey, can you write a recommendation for my kid to go to college? And he would never say no, but he was never writing the recommendations. I was. And also I had no information, neither did he, on anything about these kids. So the application or the recommendations got written, but I can tell you they were not strong ones. They just kind of felt fake. So do yourself a favor and just reach out to the folks that you've done extraordinary work for, the people who owe you one, the people who you've gone up and beyond for. So I would also say give them about 6 weeks to write the recommendations, at least. A lot of people are going to procrastinate anyway and wait till the night before, but that you are going to be making them feel a lot better, especially for the folks who do, need some time to prepare or block it in. Maybe they're, going on leave for a while or on vacation or about to have a kid. So I would say at least 6 weeks. I would also give them guidance and examples. So make the process easy for them and give them reminders of the key strengths you want to communicate, examples of moments you want them to bring in. But don't give them something so structured that it could be cut and pasted, because schools will give automatic dings if they find out the recommender did not actually write the recommendation themselves. And a lot of schools have software to detect this now, so I wouldn't chance it. We do know of at least one person who had their offer taken away for this. So beyond that, I would just say remain engaged with your recommenders and be genuine and nurture those relationships before and after you ask them for this favor. And let's move on to another case here. So Austin had a solid GPA from a private university, a 710 GMAT, and was not coming from an underrepresented demographic. He worked for 4 years in PE and wanted to stay in PE, but transitioned to the consumer space and was having trouble differentiating himself from all the many PE applicants. So he didn't have a ton of community or leadership experience outside of work because he was getting crushed. But he did help a family friend start an athletic clothing business on the side. And he wrote a business plan. He interfaced with potential customers and retailers at trade shows and conferences. And so when it came time to pick a recommender, he used this woman that he had helped out as one of them. So she could show a completely different side of him than what his supervisors could show. And this made him stand out among the PE crowd and make him seem more well-rounded as a candidate. And even with the 710 GMAT, which isn't bad, but not necessarily the median, he was accepted at Wharton. So for your essays, as I mentioned, this is where I really think each and every one of you has complete control and should be able to get an A. There's really no shortcut. What you're going to probably cover in each, you definitely want to answer the question, but what you will cover for each school is why you want an MBA, why you need to get it right now, what you want to do in the short term and the long term after your MBA, and tell stories around them in order to make this believable. Stories from your past and stories about your values, stories about how you were raised. Um, you're not going to be able to cut and paste essays from one school to the next. Each school is going to ask their own questions in their own format and with different word count. And coming from someone who has read a lot of these essays over the years, you might think some of these can be copied and pasted, but it is very obvious if you answered a different question. And especially for M7 schools, they all know what the questions are. They don't change much from year to year. A lot of these admissions folks talk to each other. I mean, they talk to us. I meet with them twice a year, the deans of admissions, and learn, what's the latest on their program and what they are looking for this year. But yeah, just know that. So you can't, necessarily be like, I'm just going to write this one set of essays and then I'm done with all my essays. They're all going to be different enough that you're going to want to really give them the dedicated focus, especially if you're focusing on schools in the M7 tier. Okay. So let's now talk about Vijay. Um, So after working on Vijay's career goals and roadmap, along with his overall application strategy, we started working on his essays. And he came from an engineering background and wanted to pursue product management and had a detailed roadmap of how he was going to get there. When we started working on Columbia's goals essay, he realized that he had a lot of trouble actually creating a first draft. And it took him a couple weeks. In fact, he just wasn't comfortable writing and had a hard time getting started. Then he overwriting, which a lot of people do, where he actually sent me 1,000 words for a 500-word essay. And like I said, this is challenging for a lot of people. So if you feel like this is you, don't worry, you're not alone. But the issue was, even in that long first draft, Vijay's that draft essay explained his career applications, but it didn't have any short or midterm career goals or roadmap. So we did go through several iterations, maybe more than 10 for this essay alone. But the thing was, he had all the material. He just, needed help telling his story in a very structured, specific, and compelling way. In some ways, there's a formula to answering these, essay questions. But there's also an art, and then there's the storytelling aspect. So it's not, as direct as, oh, here's the question, let me just answer it. All these things kind of have to be very thoughtfully woven in. And as a result, once he got it right, Vijay got into Columbia, Ross, and Kellogg, and ended up choosing Columbia. So now is the time to get a sense of where you personally stand with your profile. So timing is really important. If you're listening to this webinar now, maybe you are considering round one applications this fall, or maybe you're just getting a really early start and thinking a few years out. So do you have 2 years or do you have 2 months? That's going to help you figure out how much of this you can adjust. So going back to the initial candidate, maybe you've done well in undergrad with quant heavy classes, as well as 740 on the GMAT, but the other areas of evaluation could be improved. I encourage you to assess your current profile in these areas to help identify what your strengths are versus your weaknesses. And while you don't need an A in every single area, I encourage you to set a target or a goal. So if you were to address your weaknesses, would that turn your B's and C's into A's potentially? Putting something together like what's shown on this slide will help identify any gaps for you to prioritize your steps to address. So now let's talk about creating an action plan. So take a look at all of your weaknesses as you would define them and figure out a plan to address them. These are going to be specific to each person. Some might be more obvious than others based on the detail and examples we've shared. Look at your timeline also. If you plan on applying in round one this year, you'll likely have to prioritize and choose how to bridge any gaps. But if you're applying in over a year, you might be able to make considerable progress. Next, I would say don't delay your testing prep. Recent grads may have the benefit of being in study mode still if you're more fresh out of undergrad. Whereas if you've been working for 5 years, then test prep is going to be a little less comfortable and you're probably going to be potentially a little more busy. So either way, just don't put this one off. You don't want to be that person taking the GMAT again, the week before applications are due while you're trying to scramble together to finish your essays. Not a fun position to be in. Next, I would say get to know programs and start to consider what would be a good fit for you. So there's all sorts of programs. There's full-time executive MBA and many others, all sorts of topics and experiences. So the best way to learn more is to start attending these info sessions and spend time on their websites and connect with current students or alumni if you can. Recommenders are also critical, as we said, so nurture those relationships and don't just disappear and then pop up, years later and say, hey, I need something. Maybe warm them up a little bit. And then self-reflection is important because you need to be clear on who you are, what are some of your core personality traits, and how have you demonstrated them? What motivates you? What drives you as a person? What are some of your proudest moments? That could totally be an interview question. I've heard that one before. What experiences have shaped you? We learn a lot from our failures too. So don't be afraid to share a story about a time you failed and just learned a ton and then applied that to something in the future and came out on top. That's not a bad story to tell at all. MBA programs are not looking for people that are bulletproof. They're looking for multi-dimensional human beings that can be genuine and true to themselves and make up for an amazing class. Finally, I would say clarify your short and long-term goals. So this is going to help you identify your why MBA and why now. It's also going to help you identify specific attributes as you look at all the different programs. So did you want to be in a specific location like New York? Well, then maybe that would be CBS, or maybe you want to be in a more rural area. Maybe that would be Tuck. So lots of things to consider there. So let's move on to how Stratus can help you now. We're almost at the end of our session here, and I'll be moving on to Q&A. So here at Stratus, all of our counselors have MBAs from top programs. And as you can see here, we've even had, the numbers keep going up every single year, but last year's fall enrollment, we saw over $10 million in scholarships for our applicants. We do something called a team approach. So this allows for multiple sets of eyes on all of your materials. You're going to be working, you'll have one counselor that you'll be working on with one-on-one on your application, but they will be pulling in other folks throughout the process. For example, let's say you're working with me on several different applications to include Wharton, where I attended, but you're also applying to HBS and several other schools. Well, once we would get your essays to 85%, we would actually check in with our HBS rep on the team, an alum who would provide a blind second read on your HBS essay with your resume to replicate what an admissions committee sees and help just add a little more nuance or help shape the finishing touches on your essays. So that's, I think, very helpful and gets each of your essays very tailored for each school. Counselors also have passion for mentoring and coaching, and the team has decades of admissions committee experience combined, including sitting on admissions committees, conducting alumni interviews, serving as second-year admissions fellows, reading applications, and conducting interviews. So you really couldn't do any better than, getting the preparation from such a diverse team. There's also a diversity of team experience that we've got. We've got folks who were in PE previously, finance, strategy consulting like me, nonprofit, veteran like me, also journalism, technology, energy, real estate, entrepreneurship, education, retail, and the list goes on. So you may find that you want to work with the person who understands the industry that you came from or the one that you want to go into so they can help you craft that language and help you with your narrative to make it super sharp. So we also have something I just want to mention here called a 4-school guarantee. So if you apply to 4 schools in round 1 with us and are not accepted anywhere, we will actually support you on applying to 2 more schools in round 2 completely for free. I say that just to let you know that it exists. That being said, I have never had to use the 4-school guarantee with anyone that I've worked with, 4 schools with on round 1. And across our entire team, I would say each year 1 or 2 people end up needing to use it, but it's just a little extra insurance if that is of importance to you. So just wanted to share this final slide here. If you would like to do a free consultation with me or anyone on our team, you can go ahead to that link there, stratusadmissions.com/consult, and you can look through all of our bios and see who you'd like to talk with for 30 minutes to do all the things that we mentioned on this call, assessing your profile, seeing where you have A's, where you have F's, where you have C's, and what you still have room to improve and how you could do that. So that's completely for free. And if you'd also like to talk about, what it might look like to work together, you're in a good window for getting very high quality applications across the finish line right now for round one. I would say the longer you wait, maybe it might be more advantageous to shift to round two. Even if you're still trying to nail your standardized test down, I always tell people get started on the other elements of your application in parallel, because the upfront part of what you work on is not cranial in the same way that your test prep is. It's a lot more introspective, getting clear on your story, just kind of honestly taking stock of what you've done with your life and what you want to spend this one precious life doing going forward. So, yeah. And also, if you do a comprehensive package, it's unlimited hours. So the earlier you start, the better. However, even if you're not interested in working together, we've got more of these webinars coming up that you can join totally for free. These are just a few of them that you can also find the links to on our website if you want to go ahead and register for any of them. So with that, I'm going to move over to the comment section here and spend the last 12 minutes answering some of these questions from you all. So feel free to answer any more that may come to you in the next little bit. All right, let's see. If I don't have prior experience in corporate finance, can I break into investment banking or private equity with an M7 MBA? I would say definitely yes. I think investment banking is going to be actually a little easier than PE with an M7 MBA, but both are possible. But I would say IB, I'll just give my background as an example. I did not want to go into investment banking. I obviously went the consulting route, but I had a lot of friends who were veterans who were really excited about going in investment banking. And that is, it's kind of like consulting, where there is there's just, a very structured way that whole interview process goes, that recruiting process goes. So there is, very specific way that you need to prepare for it. There's a lot of networking you got to do, and you got to be pretty savvy about that. But the great thing about being at an M7 MBA is that these companies are going to come to you. You're not going to have to be traveling to them. If you're an M7 MBA that's also like close to one of the hubs for this world in New York City, even better. Obviously, finance is what schools like CBS and Wharton Booth are known for. But yeah, if you in Booth, obviously in Chicago, not far, if you wanted to stay in and get into finance there. So, but for any of these schools, the recruiters will be coming to you on campus, and I'm sure inviting you, if you get to that point, to come check out the office and get a sense of what that's like over there. So it is possible. PE, I would say harder. And some folks, what they end up doing is, going into other like finance roles post MBA and then PE after that. So kind of use something as a stepping stone. Maybe it is IB, but an M7 MBA is going to help. Also, it doesn't have to be an M7 MBA. There are other schools that actually have pretty good stats with this as well, whether it's like Duke or UNC or many others. So I wouldn't think, it has to be M7, but it's not going to hurt. All right. Hopefully that answered your question, but if not, feel free to drop a follow-up in the comments. So here's this next question. How do I set myself up as a strong candidate with a non-technical background? I am an architect and I'm aiming to move into the product management space. Great question. I felt like, architect, that's really cool. But me coming from the military where, I didn't even know what a P&L was. I was just spending money that didn't belong to anyone, I guess the government. But, a lot of leadership experience, a lot of interesting experiences there. But yeah, I too felt like I had not a technical background. And since you have an undergrad that's not necessarily technical either, I would say, I'm not sure if you've taken your standardized test yet, but if you can crush that, I think that's going to help. I also think the storytelling is going to be really important for you. So feel free to reach out if you want to talk through this more one-on-one. Um, but if you can tell a story about, how you have shown different kinds of, whether it's like technical interest or technical expertise, like maybe you can get involved in something outside of work through an extracurricular. Maybe you can show that you're involved in some kind of organization, or just that it could just be something that you're passionate about, like, yeah, I want to make this transition. Here's the compelling story and reason for why why you can believe this to be true. And storytelling can go a very long way. But I think, I wouldn't sell you. Like, there are ways to make, actually, I worked with an architect last round, who, yeah, actually wanted to move into finance. And it was actually one of the most interesting essays to write. And I think, I know it was unique and memorable. He ended up going to HBS. So no need to fret about that. But yeah, I think storytelling and just showing that you're like up on your stats will be key for you. Is it possible to get into a top college with a gap year, or is it not possible? Definitely possible. It's all in how you sell that gap year. Did you get, let go, and you fell on hard times and didn't really do much productive stuff? And, like that's kind of a hard story to tell. But did you do so, whether you did it on your own accord or not, like what did you do with that time off? I've actually helped people put together applications. I had a client who took a year off to go just clear his head in the middle of undergrad. And he was having some trouble adjusting and ended up doing an outdoor leadership course during that time and helping his family with their business, and then returning to school. And it actually ended up being, I think, one of the most powerful parts of his application. I also had another client this last year who was applying to part-time programs, and she had been let go from her job. But in the meantime, she had been so active in anything she did have control over, and had gotten other offers since then to just get a job. But she knew she was actually holding out for the right one. So that was another really fun story to tell. And she ended up getting into every school she applied to with scholarship money everywhere. So it's definitely possible. It's all in how you tell the story. What was the course offered by Berkeley? It's if you look up UCB Extension Math for Management online, you should be able to find it. Costs some money, but well worth it if it helps supplement and give the admissions committee faith in your quantitative abilities, I would say. And like I said, anyone should be able to get an A in that course, because you've got all the time in the world to study and do it at your own pace. So this next question, I've got 3.5 years experience in banking, followed by 4 years in university teaching. I have also done 2 consultancy projects during my stint as a teacher. Is my 8 years experience a negative point? Wow, what an interesting journey you've been on. That's really cool. I think 8 years, like I mentioned, you're right on the edge of the median range of work experience. So I don't think it's bad at all. I think it's all in a matter of how you tell the story. You've kind of been doing a lot of different things. I would wonder, what do you want to do next after school? And how are you leveraging the things that you've done before? Does this all tie into a cohesive narrative, or are you someone who just kind of like does random things and switches every few years? Like, will the MBA even be useful in years to come? I can already see a way that we could put this into a compelling narrative and story for sure. So I wouldn't worry about that. The other thing is, I would just say 8 years kind of puts you on the fringe of whether you're doing a full-time MBA or an executive MBA. And the reason I say that is, if you're in a classroom full of people who might have only had 3 years total work experience, and they're all talking about, what they learned from their jobs, and then we've got someone over here who is just way more senior, obviously you're going to have things to share, but maybe you're not going to gain as much from the classroom teaching. So for you, it might be actually better to go to an executive MBA. Now, some people just do not want that experience. They want the full-time MBA. They don't want to be doing it part-time. They don't want that network. They want this network. So I think you're right on the edge, and I think you would have to, I would get it in round one this year if you can, and I would also just be open to potentially, the following year considering more the executive MBA. But I'm not even saying like that's a hard and fast rule. Again, from my own experience, there were a lot of veterans who had to spend like 10 years in the Army before they went to business school. So I was on the younger side of the veteran cohort going to getting my MBA in my late 20s, but a lot of them were already in their 30s. So um, all that to say, you could still do full time. You could also do executive MBA, but I think this is a very interesting story that you should, just very clearly show how this all led you to an MBA and how you're going to leverage all these cool experiences that you've already done. Can someone with a low percentage in their graduation get a chance in a top MBA college? What other aspects should one work on to strengthen their profile? Yeah, so this is just one thing in the entire holistic report card that we talked about. I think a low percentage in graduation, you know, sounds like basically a low GPA. That is going to be only important for your academics bucket. And in the academics, like I said, there's also your standardized test score, which someone like you is going to want to get a very high score that's definitely above 80%. And with that, why that's important is that's actually a lot more recent than your undergrad GPA. So you could totally make the argument there of like, hey, that's the type of student I was back then, and I would share an optional essay. What happened? Like, you want to tell them a reason. You don't want them to just come up with a reason in their head. But maybe you had a lot of family stuff going on. Maybe it was just tough to adjust. Maybe, maybe you had a surgery that came out of nowhere. Who knows? But I would just share that and then do very well on your standardized test. And you could also do one of those math quant courses just to show like a very recent transcript of how you would perform in the classroom potentially. So that's like kind of the academics bucket, but a lot of people I work with actually have this fatal flaw of a below 3.4 GPA, like all the way down to 1.9 I've actually worked with, and these folks still can get into programs. Sometimes really good ones, you'd be surprised. Because the story is really compelling, because their recommenders truly celebrate them, because they, do an exceptional job at work, but maybe, they were just a less than stellar student many, many years ago. I would say try to strengthen the academics bucket as much as possible, just so that's not a cause for concern. And then make sure that the rest of your application is as sparkly as possible. Okay, I think we only have time for one more question, but is wanting to learn more or dive deeper into a specific industry a valid enough reason for doing an MBA? Yeah, I would say definitely. But I think you should definitely connect that to, I want to go into that industry after my MBA. So it just doesn't sound like, I don't really know what I'm doing after my MBA. I just want to come here and explore what's out there because, I've been very pigeonholed in this one industry and I just, want to learn more about other industries. That can all be true. And for a lot of people, that's exactly why they go to an MBA. They just know that they don't want to do what they've been doing and they want to go get like an academic grounding in whatever is available out there. But just don't tell the schools that. Go figure that out once you get there. But in your essays, you want to be very clear and communicate that you want to go in this industry, that you want to have like an academic background in it, and that's how you want to leverage your MBA. So, oh gosh, sorry, there were a lot more questions, but this was great. Thank you so much, guys. And if you have anything else that you want to connect with one-on-one, like I said, we can do a free 30-minute call, whether it's with me or anyone else on the Stratus team. Feel free to reach out via that link for the free consultation there. And I'm just so appreciative of you all for joining me today in the last discussion of the day and for all of your amazing questions. Thank you so much.